Over the course of this pandemic, I think it's fair to say that time has somewhat lost its meaning. Days have blended into one another, weeks passing by in an instant and sometimes lagging forever. And what do months mean anymore? There's been a lack of distinction to time when we're at home through the days of the week. What difference is there on the weekend? When we can't go out, what does it mean to have Friday night or Saturday or Sunday? On Monday of this past week, I had a phone call with someone and we made plans and talked. And throughout that whole conversation, I was convinced that it was really Sunday, only discovering at the end of the call that I was 24 hours out. As a Huffington Post journalist put it, before the coronavirus pandemic, our lives had structure and routine. Days had meaning. Now, the week is one long delirious blur. Time seems to fly by and drag on simultaneously. Or as this tweet put it, whoever said the days are long but the years are short did not know about 2020. But for us as Jews, the counting of time has always been significant. Our Torah begins with the story of creation, where we count the days of creation. We count time at the very beginning, giving definition to time so that we might arrive at that seventh day and celebrate Shabbat. Time matters, and counting time matters. And this week in our Torah portion, we're counting once again. We read, Adonai said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. We start counting again. Time as a construct does not have meaning for slaves because their time is not their own. They are at the behest of someone else. The counting of time is something that we are able to do as free people. That's when time matters. And so before we can leave Egypt, before we emerge fully into freedom, we need to start counting time again because that's what we do as free people. And then, following immediately from the introduction of time and the months, God immediately decrees our first festival. We get the laws of Passover, of Pesach, because we don't just count time, but we're also called upon to remember time. We remember Egypt. We remember the experience there, and we celebrate and remember each and every subsequent year. While the pandemic has certainly challenged the passage of time, these last few weeks have once again made me acutely aware of it and how time is in many ways a construct. I think back to where I was on Wednesday 2 weeks ago, standing in my living room glued to the television because I could not believe what I was seeing in our nation's capital. I don't need to remind you of the images of terrorists mounting an insurrection and seeking to topple the democratic institutions upon which this country rests. I was scared at what I was witnessing. Scared by the white supremacist paraphernalia and slogans in general, and by the anti-Semitic ones in particular. But 2 weeks after that Wednesday, just 2 days ago, I was once again glued to the television. And on a certain level, once again, I could not believe what I was seeing. The strength of our democracy was on full display in the ability to come together just 2 weeks after that awful Wednesday for a Wednesday of unity and hope. I was struck by the fact that the inauguration was being chaired by Senator Roy Blunt, a Republican, and Senator Amy Klobuchar, a Democrat, coming together. It was lovely to see former presidents and their spouses sitting together and to once again witness the ongoing love affair that appears to have developed between President George W. Bush and First Lady Michelle Obama. And despite the fears that many of us had, it was wonderful to witness the peaceful transition of power, not because of support of this candidate or that candidate, this party or that party, but because of what it represents in regards to who we are as America. 2 weeks is such a short period of time, And yet the 14 days, those 336 hours, the 20,160 minutes between those two Wednesdays felt like an eternity. And at the same time, almost just an instant. The shadow of the preceding day loomed large, but there was no darkness on display. The fear still lingered, but there was hope in the air. We have a blessing in Judaism. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Shecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who has kept us alive, sustained us, and brought us to this season. That prayer recognizes the precariousness of the passage of time. It reminds us that simply surviving from one season to the next is worthy of celebration. It calls on us to never take life or those peak moments within it for granted, but to stop, to pause, and to celebrate them, recognizing the wonder, recognizing the miracle. Inauguration Day should always be a Shecheyanu moment. Our nation survives. Our democratic process survives. Our republic survives. We might have taken these things for granted in the past, but the wake-up call of January 6th ensured that on January 20th, we were aware of how much of a blessing it is for the democratic process to run its course and for our elected officials to be duly inaugurated. The shadow of Wednesday was still there. When Lady Gaga sang the national anthem, proudly we hailed, she sang with a determined fist. Ramparts we watched, she pointedly looked around the Capitol building. And as she sang about the flag, she looked to the flags waving on the Capitol. When Vice President Harris took the oath of office and said, "I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic," I heard those words in a way that I had not heard them before. The domestic portion echoed louder than it had ever before, but the oath was still taken, and democracy prevailed. It is important that we are in the shadow of that first Wednesday because it ensures that we are remembering what happened and hopefully learning the lessons from that frightful day. The Passover festival, introduced in this week's Torah portion, is all about remembering the experience of Egypt so that we might learn from them. We don't just focus on freedom as a celebration, but we remember that we were slaves. Similarly, we cannot just remember what happened on Wednesday the 20th, we also have to keep remembering what happened on Wednesday the 6th. We have to remember the threat that our country faced. We have to learn from it, and then, after learning lessons, we can celebrate that we overcame it. To borrow once more from Passover, a Shecheyanu for Inauguration Day, Dayenu. That would be enough. But I cannot stand here without celebrating the other Shecheyanu moments that we witnessed. Moments that I hope we can celebrate regardless of political affiliation because they represent the ideals of America. Shecheyanu for Amanda Gorman, who stepped forward as the youngest inaugural poet ever and the first person to be named National Youth Poet Laureate. As she said in her own words, and I recognize that I cannot do her words justice for the powerful way that she presented them, we, the successors of a country in a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president only to find herself reciting for one. Standing there and reciting those words at that place, at that time, that was a moment worthy of Shecheyanu. Dayenu, that would have been enough. But we should also say a Shecheyanu for the state of Georgia, who sent a black man and a Jewish man to serve in Washington, D.C. as their senators. What these two men represent should not be underestimated and must not be lost in this moment. Reverend Raphael Warnock, the pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, the church once led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself, shared that the 82-year-old Hans that used to pick somebody else's cotton went to the polls and picked her youngest son to be a United States senator. And John Ossoff, a young Jewish man from Georgia, from the state that in 1915 had witnessed the horrific lynching of a Jewish man, Leo Frank, in 2021 they were sending a Jewish man to the Senate. And in his pockets as he was sworn in, John Ossoff held copies of the ship's manifest recorded at Ellis Island when his great-grandfather Israel arrived in 1911 and his great-grandmother Annie arrived in 1913. It's not about Democrat or Republican. It's about the American dream and saying a Shecheyanu that we have reached this moment in these two men. Dayenu, that would be enough. But we still must say a Shecheyanu as we have finally reached the moment where a woman has been elected to be vice president of our country. Kamala Harris shattered multiple glass ceilings on Wednesday when she took her oath of office, and that is worthy of celebration. She took the oath as the first woman to do so, the first black woman to do so, and the first woman of South Asian descent to do so. She is a first in all of those ways as our vice president. She broke multiple barriers for equality in our country, and when that happens, regardless of political affiliation, we can and should say a Shecheyanu. And in the Jewish community, we can also say a little Shecheyanu for our Jewish first, second gentleman, Doug Emhoff. What a difference 2 weeks can make. But as the Shecheyanu blessing reminds us, we celebrate in part because we recognize how precarious it was that we would reach this moment. We need to remember January 6th, just as we remember January 20th. The two exist side by side, just as we remember our slavery in Egypt before we celebrate freedom in the wilderness. Tonight, we recognize, we remember, and we celebrate. And so we say, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Shecheyanu, v'kiyamanu, v'higianu, lazman hazeh. Amen.